Committee will come to order. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, General. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. I want to point out 3 things that you've said so far today because I want to emphasize these for the committee going forward. One was you said we will not back down, we will not be intimidated, and the other thing you said too was the way to not interfere with an investigation is to not investigate the investigation. Now, I thought that was particularly apropos here because this committee has been doing exactly the opposite. We've been, under the chairman's leadership, investigating prosecutors all over the country in the middle of criminal investigations and sometimes post-indictment, sometimes pre-indictment, I think in an effort, frankly, to derail the prosecutions in those cases. And I'll start with the one, this is the Alvin Bragg effort. The chairman and 2 other committee chairs sent a letter, I think 2 actually, to D.A. Bragg. At the time he was still investigating former President Trump for potential prosecution. And then after he was indicted, they raised the issue again. And the concern I had on that front was multiple. One was one of the letters that the committee chair sent was demanding information that potentially would have violated state law in New York, similar to the federal grand jury secrecy laws that we have in some of the matters that you govern, if he had complied with what the committee had demanded. But more importantly, I thought it was pretty clear-cut that it was an effort to undermine and derail D.A. Bragg's investigation. There was a similar version of that with D.A. Willis. I know there have been a lot of calls.
Would the gentleman yield for just a second?
Not at this point. Although I'd be willing to make your letters a part of the record at the end of the... D.A. Willis in Georgia faced similar calls. In fact, there are a number of prosecutors across the country, frequently they're in blue jurisdictions, cities, in red states, where they face pressure from usually state officials to curtail the way they're doing investigations. And in some instances, the state AGs have stripped them of their authority, even though they've been duly elected by citizens in those states. And then with respect to the Jack Smith investigations, at the beginning of the hearing, the chairman brought up Trump did everything DOJ asked him to do. Now, this is with respect to the search warrant. And I was appalled at what was said. Frankly, as the record bears out, both in the indictment and frequently in statements made by Mr. Trump himself, there were multiple efforts by the Department of Justice to reach out through the attorneys that represented Mr. Trump and have him comply and turn over documents. He refused to do so. In fact, the allegations are he, in fact, moved documents and tried to hide them so the Department of Justice couldn't get them. And that also led to the issue where Mr. Trump's lawyers ended up having to provide information and testimony about what had happened, which is highly unusual. But this scenario is highly unusual. And we know that's the case because former Vice President Pence and current President Biden had similar issues, but they complied with the request by the Department of Justice, turned over the documents, and so you didn't need a search warrant. But the news here is, I guess, if you don't comply with subpoenas from the Department of Justice, they will go get the information. They'll get a search warrant and go get it. And I know that because I've seen that in multiple cases in my career. There's no surprise, and there's certainly no 2 tiers of justice with respect to what was done in that instance. In fact, the fact that they took so long to do it, I think, is based entirely on the fact that he had been president. And then with respect to Mr. Weiss, because this is the most recent version, and I get why they're doing it. They want to try and build a case to impeach President Biden. The Weiss angle seems to be one of the ways they're trying to do that. But as Congressman Buck said, everything the department did with respect to Mr. Weiss was correct, because if the Biden administration had removed him when it came into power, there would have been howls from the Republican side that you were derailing the investigation because Weiss was already on it, and if you brought in somebody new, they'd have to start over again. And in fact, the Senate Republicans, as you testified earlier, sought your assurances that you would let him continue going forward, and as you've testified today, you've done exactly that. So I want to be clear. I know the committee's talking about bringing Mr. Weiss into testimony. They brought all these other people in to testify who were part of an active investigation. But it is a horrible precedent to be bringing in prosecutors in the middle of an investigation that's about to go to trial, that's already been indicted. That's not the way this committee should be doing business. We should allow prosecutors to move forward. If we got questions after the fact, we can raise them, as you pointed out. Mr. Weiss is going to issue a report at the end. Let's let them do their jobs and stop politicizing these cases. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to Chairman to clear the record on some issues.
Yeah, I thank the gentleman for yielding. Just two responses to the gentleman, my friend from Maryland. He said they'll get a search warrant and go get it unless it's Hunter Biden. Then they tip off the defense counsel. We know that happened. Second, relative to Mr. Bragg. Mr. Bragg sued me, and it went to court. And guess what the court said? They said we were right, and the guy we wanted to talk to, one of his prosecutors, came here and testified in this room. So the court was on our side there. Yield back to the gentlelady from Indiana.
With the gentlelady yield?
I need to get to my question. I'm sorry.
All right.
Attorney General, you had a very moving statement about your grandparents coming here from Belarus to live in the country without fear of prosecution. I grew up in very similar country, Ukraine now, and when I came here as a young person, I believed in the value as an American not to be afraid of my government. But I wanted to tell you, and I want to share with you and get your thoughts on that. Are you aware that a lot of Americans are now afraid of being prosecuted by your department? Are you aware about that? Are you aware of that? I'm just saying, are you aware or not?
I think that constant attacks on the department and saying
it's not attacks. Well, let me give you an example.
I don't know.
We talk about January 6th. People.
I'm sorry?
Here, there some people came on January 6th. There probably were some people that came on January 6th here, that had bad intent. But a lot of good Americans from my district came here because they are sick and tired of this government not serving them. They came with strollers and the kids, and there was chaotic situation because the proper security wasn't provided. That's a question that was answered really why. Why we debated for 45 minutes on the floor and didn't stop the debate after the people broke into the Capitol. But these people came, they were throwing the smoke bombs into the crowd with strollers with kids. People were showed up, FBI agent to people's houses. You had in my district, in my town, FBI phone numbers all over the district. Please call that. People are truly afraid. I just want to make sure if you're not aware that you are. And this is a big problem when people are afraid of their own government. And I'll share some other things. We're talking about justice system. I don't question, you're probably not a bad person. I don't know you, but what I'll tell you, you're in charge of the department. And people right now feel, I look at Durham report and I called on the FISA violations of queries of millions of Americans, right? It's like KGB, but when I read Durham reports, we have this, you have a nice, playbook. First, let's have a special counsel, and then you don't have to answer any questions here. Then, let's extend slow walk investigation on Hillary Clinton, on Hunter. Everything is slow walked. We were very quick on Donald Trump, but you were very slow walked. Then, by the time, that investigation ended, statute of limitation expired, and all of your agents need to be tested for amnesia. No one recalls anything. Okay, you probably should have as part of your hiring policy. So no one held accountable, which was egregious what happened, in that report. When I read about them, I can't believe it happened in the United States of America. This is my frustration. I'll be honest with you. Then, it's very interesting, regardless what it is, even people in Obama administration raise concerns. How can President's sons be serving on, corrupt Ukrainian oligarchs? Do you understand that it actually can undermine the one Ukrainian effort and policy? I think these concerns were raised. The Obama administration didn't do anything about it. These people are dying right now, and Americans don't trust this president. So I want to ask you one thing. as I don't need answer because I know you're not going to, but I think you're probably a good American and you care. And a lot of these people are so afraid they cover up this stuff, I think, in your department because they're embarrassed that what we became as a country to say that what our Department of Justice became. That allows Russians to do propaganda in Chinese. It allows them to destabilize our country. That is danger to our republic. It is significant danger. And I have just one more question from you. I agree on corporate crimes and FISA stuff, even with Democrats, that we need to do a better job. One more question for you. Do you believe that, you talk about rights to vote, but do you believe that only U.S. citizens should be voting in this election and doing anything to make sure that only eligible people vote in elections?
Yes and yes.
Okay, I would like to see that, what you do. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Vermont is recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Garland, thanks so much for being here today. I know it's been a long day for you. Now, I'm relatively new to the committee and I'm still getting my feet under me, but as far as I can tell, what we are doing here today is talking about a lot of conspiracy theories, and it's frustrating and tedious for those of us in the committee, but I can tell you it is absolutely maddening for my constituents back home in Vermont. We have so much important work to do to keep the government open. We're days away from a shutdown, and I just want to remind folks that we're in this situation because my colleagues across the aisle are reneging on a deal that a majority of their conference made along with their speaker. That's why we are in this situation. If they are successful in shutting down the government, seniors who rely on Social Security benefits will be impacted. Thousands of Medicare recipients and applicants will be impacted. Service members will stop receiving paychecks. Veteran services will be curtailed. Those are the grim consequences from Republicans' inability and unwillingness to govern. I need to just start with that. Let's do some level setting here. Now, let's get to the real work of the DOJ and how Congress can help the agency better serve its mission. Gun violence continues to plague our nation. We see the wreckage every day on our television sets, on our computers, and in our communities. As a member of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, this issue is incredibly important to me and so many of my constituents. Now, I believe there's actual room for bipartisan congressional action on gun violence, at least in some areas. One of those areas, red flag laws. It's a great place to start. Vermont is one of 21 states that was able to pass red flag laws. These laws are working to keep guns out of the hands of people who are in crisis. And yet many states did not even apply for funding from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to better implement red flag laws and to raise awareness about the program. In June 2021, DOJ published model legislation to help states craft their own extreme risk protection order. Now, Republicans continue to make unfounded accusations that these laws violate civil rights by taking guns away from Americans without any due process. Can you explain the due process protections that are put into place in the model legislation that DOJ proposed?
Yes, and I would start by saying, of course, there's room for bipartisan agreement, and the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is a very good example. And that includes the ability to have funding for states that want to craft and put into place red flag laws. The requirement is that the red flag law include due process protections. So I don't know every element of the model legislation, but the general idea is that relatives or friends of the person have to go to a court and get some kind of adjudication that the person is a danger to themselves or to others. This normally relates to mental illness problems. It may relate to some others. And so if a gun is taken away under those circumstances, there's then a right to appeal, to have a full hearing in order to adjudicate the question. I can't say I know every technicality, but I think that's about it.
No, I appreciate that. And it's especially important to states like mine, rural states that have real issues with the silent killers, domestic violence, and also suicide. And so these are instances in which red flag laws can really make a difference. Shifting gears here, I, along with Senator Warren and 20 of our colleagues, recently submitted a comment letter applauding the draft merger guidelines and urging agencies to finalize them. Corporate concentration remains a pressing problem for the U.S. economy, and I fear that we're falling behind in this area, and American consumers continue to feel the pain because of this. With the introduction of the draft merger guidelines, how does the department plan to ensure that future mergers and acquisitions do not stifle competition or harm consumers? Because that's often the pushback that we get.
Yeah, I think obviously the intention of the merger guidelines is to set forth the enforcement policy of the department. The different generations of the guidelines, which I hate to say it, go all the way back to the time when I was in law school, have been adopted and or been helpful to generations of judges. I've sat on at least 2 or 3 merger cases myself where we used some of the learning from the merger guidelines. The current guidelines reflect really an adjustment to the current technology. Two-sided platforms, network effects that simply did not exist at the time of the last set of merger guidelines were passed.
Thank you, Attorney General. Just briefly in closing, last year you spoke on the subject and said that DOJ's enforcement against corporate crime has waxed and waned, but it's waxing again. That is news to my ears. Thank you so much for your service. I yield back.